The sun was setting over the small town of Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Staff Sergeant DeAndre Williams had been driving for nearly 2 hours, and his body was aching from a full day of intense training drills at Fort Harrison. All he wanted was a cold drink and maybe some food before heading back to base. He spotted a bar called the Rusty Nail on the corner of Main Street. It wasn't fancy, just a typical small-town watering hole with neon signs in the windows and a gravel parking lot. 5 motorcycles were lined up near the entrance, their chrome gleaming under the streetlights. DeAndre didn't think much of it. He'd been to plenty of bars near military bases, and bikers were usually friendly folks who respected the uniform. As he pushed through the heavy wooden door, the smell of beer and fried food hit him. The bar was dimly lit, with country music playing softly from a jukebox in the corner. A few locals sat scattered around, nursing their drinks and watching a baseball game on the TV mounted above the bar. In the far corner, 5 men in leather vests sat around a table, their voices loud and their laughter even louder. DeAndre walked to the bar and took a seat on one of the worn leather stools. The bartender, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a ponytail, looked up from wiping down glasses. Her name tag read Betty. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked with a warm smile. "Just a beer, please." "Whatever you have on tap is fine," DeAndre replied, setting his car keys on the counter. Betty nodded and poured him a cold one, setting it down on a coaster. "You stationed at Fort Harrison?" "Yes, ma'am. Been there about 8 months now," DeAndre said, taking a grateful sip of his beer. "We appreciate your service," Betty said quietly, but there was something in her eyes. A warning, maybe. She glanced quickly toward the corner table and then back at him. DeAndre noticed the look but didn't say anything. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages from his family back in Atlanta. His mom had sent pictures of his nephew's birthday party. He smiled at the photos, feeling a pang of homesickness. Military life meant missing a lot of these moments. The laughter from the corner table grew louder. DeAndre could feel eyes on him, but he kept his focus on his phone. In his 6 years in the Army, he'd learned when to pay attention to his surroundings and when to just mind his own business. This felt like a time to do the latter. "Well, what do we have here?" A voice called out from behind him. DeAndre didn't turn around. He took another sip of his beer and continued scrolling through his phone. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the voice said. Much closer now. DeAndre slowly set down his phone and turned his head. A man stood about 3 feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, with a gray beard and arms covered in faded tattoos. His leather vest had patches all over it, and his eyes were cold and hard. The other 4 bikers had turned in their seats, watching the interaction with interest. "Can I help you with something?" DeAndre asked calmly. The man looked him up and down, his lip curling slightly. "Just wondering what you're doing in here. This is a local spot. For locals." "I'm just having a drink," DeAndre said evenly. "Not looking for any trouble." "That's funny," the man said, leaning against the bar. "Because it seems like trouble follows your kind everywhere." The air in the bar seemed to get heavier. The few other patrons suddenly became very interested in their drinks. Betty had stopped wiping glasses and stood frozen behind the bar, her face tight with worry. DeAndre felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean," the man said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We don't need any of you people coming in here, thinking you own the place just because you've got that uniform on." One of the other bikers laughed from the table. "Tell him Snake." So that was his name? Snake. How original, DeAndre thought. "Look," DeAndre said, turning back to face the bar. "I'm just here for one drink, then I'm leaving. No need for this to be a problem." Snake moved closer, invading DeAndre's personal space. "See, that's where you're wrong. You being here is already a problem. This is our bar. Has been for 15 years, and we decide who's welcome and who's not." DeAndre could smell the alcohol on Snake's breath. This wasn't good. He'd dealt with drunk troublemakers before, but never while he was alone and clearly outnumbered. His training kicked in and he began assessing the situation. 5 of them, all bigger guys, all looking for a fight. The exits were behind him and to his left. The other patrons wouldn't help. Betty looked terrified. "I don't want any trouble," DeAndre repeated, his hand slowly moving toward his phone on the bar. "Too late for that," Snake said, and suddenly knocked DeAndre's beer glass off the counter. It shattered on the floor, beer and glass spreading across the old wooden planks. Betty gasped.
"Snake, that's enough!"
"I'm calling the sheriff." Snake laughed without taking his eyes off DeAndre. "Go ahead, Betty. You know Sheriff Morrison won't do nothing. He's my cousin. Plus, we're just having a conversation here. Ain't that right?" The other bikers had stood up now and were slowly moving closer, forming a loose semicircle around DeAndre's stool. He could feel his heart rate increasing, but his face remained calm. 6 years of military training had taught him how to stay cool under pressure. "Betty, it's okay," DeAndre said softly. "I was just leaving anyway." He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. He was tall, about 6'2", and in excellent shape from his military training, but he wasn't stupid. 5 against 1 in an unfamiliar place with no backup. This wasn't a fight worth having. "Oh no, you don't get to just walk out of here like nothing happened," Snake said, stepping directly into DeAndre's path. "You disrespected us by even walking through that door. I think you owe us an apology." DeAndre looked Snake directly in the eyes. "I'm not apologizing for existing. Now please step aside." The other bikers moved closer, cutting off any easy path to the door. One of them, a shorter guy with a shaved head, cracked his knuckles menacingly. Another pulled out his phone and started recording, a nasty grin on his face. "This is gonna be good," the one with the phone said. "World needs to see what happens when people don't know their place." DeAndre's mind was racing. He could fight, and he'd probably take down 2 or maybe 3 of them before they overwhelmed him. But then what? He'd be in trouble with the military for brawling off base. These guys would press charges. It would be his word against 5 of theirs in a small town where the sheriff was related to the ringleader. But if he backed down, if he showed fear, it would eat at him. He'd faced enemy combatants in dangerous places. He'd earned his rank through hard work and courage, and now he was supposed to be intimidated by some small-town bullies in a bar. Betty's hand was hovering over the phone behind the bar, her eyes darting between DeAndre and Snake. The other patrons were either staring intently at their drinks or had their phones out, recording everything. DeAndre noticed an older couple near the door quickly getting up to leave. Nobody was going to help. DeAndre took a slow breath. Under the bar, his hand found his phone. With practiced ease, his thumb unlocked it and found the group chat with his unit. He typed quickly without looking. "Rusty Nail Bar. Main Street. Need backup. Now." Then he looked back at Snake and said the words that would change everything. "I'm going to give you one more chance to step aside." Snake's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Or what?" "Or nothing," DeAndre said quietly. "I'm just asking you as one human being to another to let me leave peacefully." Snake laughed and looked back at his friends. "You hear that? He's asking nicely." He turned back to DeAndre, all humor gone from his face. "Well, I'm telling you nicely that you're not going anywhere until we're done with you." He raised his fist and everything seemed to slow down. This was it. DeAndre braced himself for what came next, his military training automatically positioning his body for defense. The other patrons held their breath. Betty's hand finally grabbed the phone, and then the front door burst open. For a split second, everyone froze. Snake's fist was still raised, hovering in the air between him and DeAndre. All eyes turned toward the door, expecting to see who had just burst in with such force. But it wasn't who DeAndre was hoping for. Instead, a young couple stumbled in, laughing and clearly a few drinks in already. They stopped short when they saw the tense scene in front of them. Sorry," the guy muttered, grabbing his girlfriend's hand. "We'll come back later." They backed out quickly and the door swung shut behind them. Snake's attention snapped back to DeAndre and the cruel smile returned to his face. "Looks like nobody's coming to save you," Snake said, his voice mocking. "What were you hoping for? A whole army to show up?" The other bikers laughed at that. The one with the shaved head moved even closer, blocking DeAndre's view of the side exit. They had him completely surrounded now. DeAndre could feel the adrenaline pumping through his system, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. "Last chance," DeAndre said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Just let me walk out of here." Snake lowered his fist but didn't step back. Instead, he leaned in close, his face inches from DeAndre's. "You know what your problem is. You think that uniform makes you special. You think it makes you better than us. But in here, you're nothing. Just another person who doesn't belong." DeAndre met his gaze without flinching. I never said I was better than anyone. I just want to finish my drink and go home. Well, your drink's all over the floor now, Snake said, gesturing to the broken glass and spilled beer. Guess you'll have to find another way to make this worth our time. Betty finally spoke up from behind the bar, her voice shaking but firm. Snake, I'm serious. You need to stop this right now. I don't want any trouble in my bar. Your bar? Snake turned to look at her, his eyebrows raised. Betty, you've been working here for what, 20 years? But this ain't your bar. And you know what? Maybe it's time we had a conversation with the owner about who he lets serve drinks here. Maybe we'll suggest someone who knows how to run a proper establishment. The threat was clear. Betty's face went pale, but she didn't back down completely. The owner won't stand for this kind of behavior. The owner ain't here, is he? Snake shot back. It's just us. And our friend here who seems to think he can just waltz in anywhere he wants. One of the other bikers, a heavy-set man with a gray ponytail, spoke up for the first time. Why don't we just teach him some manners and be done with it? I got places to be. Patience, Rodney, Snake said without taking his eyes off DeAndre. We're having a nice conversation here. Ain't that right, soldier boy? DeAndre's phone was still in his hand under the bar. He had no idea if his message had gone through or if any of his unit members were even checking their phones. It was almost 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Some of them might be at the gym. Others might be in their barracks watching movies or playing video games. There was no guarantee anyone would see his text in time. He was on his own. At least for now. I've got an idea, Snake said suddenly, his tone shifting to something almost friendly, which somehow made it more menacing. Why don't you get down on your knees and apologize? Tell us you're sorry for coming into our bar uninvited. Do that, and maybe we let you walk out of here with all your teeth. The bar was completely silent except for the low hum of the jukebox, which had switched to an old country song about heartbreak and whiskey. Even the TV seemed quieter somehow. The few remaining patrons were watching with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. One older man near the back had his phone out, recording everything. DeAndre felt something hot and angry rising in his chest. He'd been trained to handle dangerous situations, to keep his cool under fire, to make smart tactical decisions. But he was also human. He was also a man who had worked hard for everything he'd achieved, who had served his country with honor, who had earned respect through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And now some drunk biker with a chip on his shoulder wanted him to get on his knees and beg? No, DeAndre said quietly. What was that? Snake cupped his ear mockingly. I don't think I heard you right. I said no, DeAndre repeated louder this time. I'm not getting on my knees. I'm not apologizing for existing. And I'm not going to let you bully me just because you've got 4 friends backing you up. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Snake's face hardened, and the fake friendliness disappeared completely. Wrong answer, Snake said. He shoved DeAndre hard in the chest. DeAndre stumbled back against the bar, his hand gripping the edge to keep from falling. Betty let out a small scream. The biker with the phone moved in closer, making sure he got everything on video. Come on, Snake taunted, shoving him again. Fight back. Give us a reason. DeAndre knew what they were doing. They wanted him to throw the first real punch. They wanted it on video so they could claim self-defense. They wanted to provoke him into doing something they could use against him later. But DeAndre had spent years learning discipline. He'd been in real combat situations where one wrong move could mean life or death. This wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This was a bar in small-town America, and as much as he wanted to defend himself, he knew the system wouldn't be on his side if this turned into a full-blown fight. I'm not going to fight you, DeAndre said, straightening up. His chest hurt where Snake had shoved him, but he didn't show it. Coward, the biker with the shaved head muttered. Snake grabbed DeAndre's uniform collar, bunching the fabric in his fist. You know what I think? I think you're all talk. I think that uniform is just a costume. I bet you've never even seen real action. Probably just push papers at that base all day. DeAndre could feel Snake's breath on his face, could see the yellowed teeth and the burst blood vessels in his eyes. This man was angry about something deeper than just a stranger walking into a bar. This was years of resentment and bitterness bubbling to the surface, and DeAndre just happened to be the target tonight. You don't know anything about me, DeAndre said calmly. I know enough, Snake spat. I know your kind always plays the victim, always crying about how unfair everything is. But you know what? Life's unfair for all of us. Difference is some of us don't go around expecting special treatment. Betty had picked up the phone behind the bar and was frantically dialing. Snake noticed and released DeAndre's collar, turning toward her instead. "Put that phone down, Betty," Snake said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I'm calling the sheriff," Betty said, her hand shaking as she held the receiver. "This has gone too far." Snake walked toward the bar and DeAndre saw his opportunity. He could make a run for the door while Snake was distracted. It wasn't the most dignified exit, but it was better than getting jumped by 5 guys in a bar. He took a step toward the door. Immediately, Rodney and the biker with the phone moved to block his path. "Where do you think you're going?" Rodney asked, crossing his arms over his massive chest. Snake had reached the bar and plucked the phone from Betty's hand, hanging it up before she could finish dialing. "Now that wasn't very nice, Betty. We're just having a conversation here. No need to get the law involved." "You're threatening a customer," Betty said, trying to sound brave but her voice cracking. "And you're threatening me." "That's not a conversation, Snake. That's assault." "Big words," Snake said, leaning across the bar. "But here's the thing, Betty. Your boss and I go way back. You call the cops, make a big scene, and I guarantee you'll be looking for a new job by Friday." DeAndre's mind was racing through options. The door was blocked. The side exit was blocked. He could try to fight his way out, but that would end badly for everyone, especially him. Where were his guys? Had they gotten his message? He glanced at his phone. The screen showed the message had been delivered 15 minutes ago. Still no response. His heart sank a little, but he couldn't give up hope. They'd come through for him before. They were a unit. They looked out for each other. Snake turned his attention back to DeAndre. "All right, I'm done playing games. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that back door with us. We're going to have a little talk in the parking lot, and then if you're lucky, you'll be able to drive yourself to the hospital." The other bikers moved in tighter, forming a wall between DeAndre and any escape route. This was it. This was the moment where things were going to get really bad. DeAndre's training told him to comply, to go with them to avoid violence in the bar where Betty might get hurt. But his instincts screamed that going into that parking lot meant serious trouble. He was just about to make a decision when he heard it. The distant rumble of vehicles approaching fast. Multiple vehicles. Snake heard it too and frowned. Glancing toward the front windows, the rumble grew louder, closer. And then, through the front window, DeAndre saw the most beautiful sight he'd seen all day. 4 military vehicles pulling into the parking lot, headlights blazing through the darkness. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the quiet street. Snake's confident smirk faltered for just a moment as he watched through the window. The other bikers shifted nervously, their tough guy act cracking at the edges. 6 soldiers in full uniform stepped out of the vehicles and headed straight for the bar entrance. DeAndre recognized them immediately. Corporal Jackson, his weapons specialist, Sergeant Torres, who'd saved his life in Baghdad, Private Chen, the youngest but toughest member of their unit, Specialist Washington, their medic, Lieutenant Brooks, their commanding officer, and Private Daniels, who could bench press 300 pounds like it was nothing. But they weren't alone. Behind them, an older black man climbed out of the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. He moved slower than the younger soldiers, but there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded attention. He was maybe in his 70s, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but he walked with the kind of authority that didn't need a uniform to prove itself. The door swung open, and Lieutenant Brooks entered first, his eyes immediately finding DeAndre. He assessed the situation in seconds, taking in the broken glass on the floor, Betty's frightened face behind the bar, and the 5 bikers surrounding his soldier. "Staff Sergeant Williams," Brooks said calmly. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir," DeAndre replied, relief flooding through him. "Just having a disagreement with these gentlemen." Snake recovered his composure quickly, puffing out his chest. "This ain't military business. This is between me and him. You boys can turn right back around." The other soldiers filed in, spreading out naturally to positions that cut off any escape routes. They didn't make it obvious, but suddenly the bikers were the ones who were surrounded. The dynamic in the room had shifted completely. "I'm Lieutenant Brooks," the officer said, his voice level but carrying weight. "And when someone threatens one of my soldiers, it becomes my business." "Nobody threatened nobody," Snake said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "We were just talking." "That's funny," Corporal Jackson said, pointing at the broken glass on the floor. "Because it looks like somebody's drink got knocked over. And my friend here looks like he's been shoved around a bit. The older man who'd come in with the soldiers finally stepped forward. He moved slowly through the group, and every soldier immediately stepped aside to let him pass. Even Lieutenant Brooks showed him deference, nodding respectfully as he walked by. The old man's eyes swept across the bar, taking everything in. When his gaze landed on Betty, his expression softened. "You all right, Betty?" he asked gently. Betty's eyes went wide with recognition and relief. "Oh, thank God you're here. I tried to call you, but Snake, I saw the panic button alert," the old man said, patting her hand across the bar. "That's why I came." Snake's face had gone pale. "Colonel Henderson," he said. And for the first time that night, there was uncertainty in his voice. So this was Colonel Henderson. DeAndre had heard the name around base, stories about a legendary officer who'd served 3 tours in Vietnam, earned a Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars, and was so respected that even the current base commander spoke his name with reverence. He'd retired 20 years ago, but was still considered a living legend in the military community. "Richard," the colonel said, using Snake's real name. "What exactly is going on here?" Snake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The other bikers looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. "We were just, Snake started, then seemed to change tactics. "Look, Colonel, you know how things are. This guy came in here like he owned the place, and we were just—" "You were just what?" Colonel Henderson cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. "Harassing a United States soldier? Breaking up my sister's bar? Threatening to get her fired?" Betty was the colonel's sister. That explained the panic button and why she'd seemed so worried earlier. She'd known Snake was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Snake's face flushed red. "Your sister? I didn't know. That this was my building?" Colonel Henderson finished for him. "The building I've owned for 35 years? The bar where my sister has worked for 23 years? Yes, Richard. My building, my bar, and you just threatened both my family and one of our soldiers in it." The colonel moved closer to Snake. And despite the age difference and the fact that Snake had 50 pounds on him, the biker actually took a step back. "Your uncle was one of my best friends," Colonel Henderson continued, his voice quieter now but somehow more powerful. "Harold Jackson, good man. Served with me in '68. Saved my life at Khe Sanh. When he died, I promised him I'd look out for you if you ever needed it." Snake's tough exterior was crumbling. His shoulders sagged slightly. "Harold told me you served too," the colonel said. "Told me you went to Iraq. Did 2 tours. Came back different like a lot of men do. He said you got in some trouble, got discharged. He died worrying about you, wondering if you'd ever find your way again." The bar was completely silent. Even the jukebox had stopped playing. The other bikers stared at their feet, and Snake's face had gone from pale to red and back to pale again. "I looked into you after Harold died," Colonel Henderson said. "Checked up on you from time to time. Heard you fell in with this crowd. Started drinking too much, getting into fights. But I thought maybe you'd figure it out on your own. Maybe you'd remember the man you used to be." Snake's voice came out rough, almost broken. "That man died over there, Colonel. You know how it is. You've been there." "I do know," Colonel Henderson said, and his voice softened just a fraction. "I know exactly how it is. I know about the nightmares. I know about the anger. I know about feeling like the whole world moved on without you while you're stuck in the mud with ghosts." He looked around at the other bikers. "I'm guessing some of you boys served too. Am I right?" Rodney nodded slowly. "Marines. 2 tours Afghanistan." The biker with the shaved head spoke up quietly. "Army. 1 tour Iraq." "And yet here you all are," Colonel Henderson said, "taking out your pain on someone who's probably been through some of the same things you have. Someone who's wearing the same uniform you once wore. Someone who's serving the same country you served." He turned back to Snake. "Your uncle would be ashamed of what you've become, Richard. And if I'm being honest, I'm disappointed too. You were a good soldier once. You had honor. You had discipline. Where did that man go?" Snake's eyes were glistening now, and he looked away, his jaw clenched tight. The other bikers looked equally uncomfortable, their earlier bravado completely deflated. Colonel Henderson walked over to DeAndre. "Staff Sergeant Williams, is it?" "Yes, sir," DeAndre said, standing a bit straighter. "What's your specialty?" "Special Forces, sir. Just rotated back from overseas 3 months ago." The colonel's eyebrows rose. "Special Forces? How many tours?" "3, sir. Afghanistan, Iraq, and one classified. Colonel Henderson looked back at Snake with an expression that was part disappointment and part disbelief. So let me get this straight. You and your friends decided to pick on a decorated Special Forces operator, a man who's probably seen more combat in 1 month than all of you combined saw in your entire service. A man who's earned medals for valor, who's put his life on the line for this country more times than we can count. That was your target tonight? Snake said nothing. There was nothing to say. You want to know what real strength is? Colonel Henderson asked, addressing all the bikers now. It's not ganging up 5-on-1 against someone in a bar. It's not using hate and anger to make yourself feel big. Real strength is what this young man showed tonight. He could have taken down 2 or 3 of you before you knew what hit you. His training alone makes him more dangerous than all of you combined. But he didn't. You know why? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Because he has discipline. He has honor. He has the kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are and not needing to prove it by hurting others. That's what a real soldier looks like, gentlemen, and every single one of you used to know that. The weight of the colonel's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. One of the other patrons who'd been recording everything slowly put his phone away, sensing that something important was happening here. Betty wiped tears from her eyes with her apron. Lieutenant Brooks and the other soldiers stood silently, watching their legend at work. Snake finally looked up, meeting DeAndre's eyes for the first time with something other than hatred. There was shame there now, and pain, and maybe the smallest hint of recognition, as if he was seeing another human being instead of just a target for his rage. I'm sorry, Snake said quietly, and it sounded like the words were being dragged out of him. I shouldn't have done that. Colonel Henderson nodded slowly. That's a start, but sorry isn't enough. Not by a long shot. Colonel Henderson walked slowly to one of the tables and pulled out a chair. He sat down with a slight groan, the kind that comes from old injuries and years of hard living. Everyone in the bar watched him, waiting to see what would happen next. Sit, the colonel said, gesturing to the chairs around him. It wasn't a request. Snake hesitated, then moved to the table and sat down. The other bikers followed his lead, arranging themselves around the table like school kids called to the principal's office. They looked nothing like the threatening gang they'd been just minutes ago. Colonel Henderson looked at DeAndre. Staff Sergeant Williams, would you join us, please? DeAndre glanced at Lieutenant Brooks, who gave him a subtle nod. He walked over and took a seat at the table directly across from Snake. The tension was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't the electric danger of violence anymore. It was something heavier, more complicated. Betty, could you bring us some coffee? The colonel called out. I think we all need to sober up and have a real conversation. Betty nodded and busied herself behind the bar, grateful to have something to do with her hands. The other soldiers remained standing, forming a loose perimeter around the table. The few other patrons who'd stuck around were dead silent, watching history unfold. Colonel Henderson leaned back in his chair and studied each of the bikers in turn. His gaze was penetrating, the kind that seemed to see right through whatever walls people put up. Richard, tell me something, the colonel said. When did you stop being a soldier and become whatever this is? Snake stared at the table. It wasn't one day, Colonel. It was a lot of days all piled on top of each other. Talk to me, Colonel Henderson said. Help me understand. Snake was quiet for a long moment. Betty brought over a tray with coffee mugs and set them on the table. Her hands were steadier now. She poured coffee for everyone, even giving DeAndre an apologetic look as she filled his cup. Finally, Snake spoke. When I came back from Iraq, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't hold a job. My wife left me. Took my kids with her. I started drinking to forget. But the more I drank, the angrier I got. Angry at everyone who didn't serve. Angry at people who had their normal lives while I was falling apart. Angry at a system that sent me over there and then forgot about me when I came home. He looked up at DeAndre and there was raw pain in his eyes. And I got angry at people like you. People who still had it together. Who still wore the uniform with pride. Because looking at you reminded me of everything I lost. Everything I used to be and can't be anymore. Colonel Henderson nodded slowly. And when did that anger turn into hate? Snake's jaw tightened. I don't know. Somewhere along the way it was easier to blame people who looked different than me instead of facing what was really wrong. The guys I hang with, they felt the same way. We fed off each other's bitterness. Made each other worse instead of better. Rodney spoke up, his voice rough. I lost my leg in Kandahar. Got a Purple Heart and a medical discharge. Came home to find out my job was gone and nobody wanted to hire a one-legged vet with PTSD. Started hanging around the VFW, drowning my problems. Met these guys. We all had the same story, man. Different details, same ending. We're all just angry and broken. The biker with the shaved head who'd been recording earlier added, I got hooked on painkillers after I got wounded. Lost everything. Wife, house, career. The VA tried to help, but I just kept spiraling. These guys were the only ones who understood what I was going through. DeAndre listened to their stories, and something unexpected happened. He felt his anger softening. Not disappearing, but shifting into something else. These weren't just racist thugs looking for a fight. They were broken men who'd taken their pain and aimed it at the wrong targets. I understand what you're going through, DeAndre said quietly. Snake looked at him with surprise. How could you understand? Because I've been where you are, DeAndre said. After my first tour, I came home different. Had nightmares every night, jumped at loud noises, couldn't connect with my family anymore. I felt like I was drowning and nobody around me could see it. He took a sip of coffee before continuing. I got angry too. Real angry. Started picking fights, drinking too much. I was heading down the same road you went down. But I got lucky. My commanding officer at the time saw what was happening. Guy named Captain Rivera. He sat me down kind of like we're sitting here now. And he told me something I'll never forget. Everyone at the table was listening now, even Snake leaning forward slightly. He said pain is like a fire, DeAndre continued. You can use it to light the way forward, or you can let it burn everything down around you. The choice is yours, but once everything's burned, there's nothing left. He got me into therapy, got me connected with other vets who were dealing with the same stuff. Took me months, but I found my way back. Colonel Henderson nodded approvingly. Captain Rivera sounds like a good man. The best, DeAndre agreed. He saved my life without firing a single shot. The colonel turned his attention back to the bikers. That's what you boys have been missing. Not someone to fight against, but someone to fight for you, to help you find your way back to the men you used to be. It's too late for that, Snake said, his voice heavy with defeat. I've burned too many bridges, done too many things I can't take back. It's never too late, Colonel Henderson said firmly. I've seen men come back from worse than what you're dealing with. But you have to want it. You have to be willing to do the work. He pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, sliding it across the table to Snake. I run a program. Veterans Helping Veterans. We meet 3 times a week. We do group therapy, job training, help with VA benefits, whatever it takes. We've helped over 200 vets in the last 10 years get their lives back together. Snake picked up the card, staring at it like it was a winning lottery ticket he wasn't sure he deserved. I've got guys who are homeless now working good jobs, the colonel continued. Guys who are addicts now 3 years sober. Guys who almost ate a bullet who are now mentoring other struggling vets. It's never too late, Richard, but you have to take the first step. Rodney leaned over to look at the card. This for real, Colonel? As real as it gets, Colonel Henderson said. Every man at that table, he gestured to where Lieutenant Brooks and the other soldiers stood, has volunteered their time to help with the program. They mentor new members, share their experiences, and prove that you can serve honorably and come home whole, or come home broken and put yourself back together. DeAndre found himself speaking before he'd fully thought it through. I'll help too if you want. I'm not an expert, but I've been through some of what you're dealing with. Maybe that counts for something. Snake looked at him with disbelief. After what I did tonight? After what I said to you? After what you did tonight, you need help, DeAndre said simply. And I believe people can change if they want to. The question is, do you want to? The bar was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the bar. Snake sat there, the business card in his hand, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. The tough exterior he'd worn like armor was completely gone now, leaving just a broken man who'd lost his way. I'm tired, Snake said, his voice cracking. I'm so tired of being angry all the time, of hating myself, of waking up and not recognizing the person I see in the mirror. Then let us help you, Colonel Henderson said gently. All of you. This invitation extends to every man at this table. The other bikers looked at each other. There was something happening here. Something none of them had expected when they walked into this bar tonight. A door was opening, one they'd thought was closed forever. What would we have to do? Rodney asked. Show up, the colonel said. That's the first step. Just show up. We meet Thursday nights at the community center. 7 o'clock. Come to one meeting. See what it's about. If it's not for you, you can walk away, but I think you'll find it's exactly what you've been looking for. Snake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring anymore who saw him cry. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve help after the things I've done. None of us deserve grace, Colonel Henderson said. But grace isn't about deserving. It's about becoming better than we were yesterday. Your uncle believed in second chances. He'd want you to take this one. DeAndre extended his hand across the table toward Snake. It hung there in the air between them, an offer of peace, of forgiveness, of possibility. For a long moment, Snake just stared at it. Then slowly he reached out and took DeAndre's hand. They shook and something old and poisonous seemed to leave the room. I'm sorry, Snake said again, and this time it carried real weight. For everything. What I said, what I did, what I represent. I'm sorry. I accept your apology, DeAndre said. Now let's see if you mean it by actually showing up Thursday night. Snake nodded, squeezing DeAndre's hand once more before letting go. I'll be there. I promise, the other bikers murmured their agreement. The transformation wasn't complete, not by a long shot, but something had shifted. A seed had been planted. Colonel Henderson stood up, groaning again as his knees protested. All right then. I expect to see all 5 of you Thursday at 7. Don't make me come looking for you. We'll be there, Colonel, Rodney said, and the others nodded. Betty came over with the coffee pot to refill cups, and she was smiling now. The fear was gone from her eyes. 3 months later, the rusty nail looked completely different on a Thursday night. The same neon signs glowed in the windows, and the same worn bar stools lined the counter. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Where there had once been tension and fear, there was now laughter and conversation. DeAndre walked through the door in civilian clothes, jeans and a Fort Harrison t-shirt, and was immediately greeted by a chorus of hellos. Betty waved from behind the bar, her smile genuine and warm. The place was packed tonight, but not with the usual crowd. Veterans of all ages filled the tables, some in wheelchairs, some with visible scars, all of them there for the same reason. DeAndre, Rodney called out from a corner table, waving him over. His prosthetic leg was visible below his shorts, something he no longer tried to hide. Saved you a seat, man. DeAndre made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging greetings as he went. He spotted Snake, or Richard as everyone called him now, helping set up chairs near the small stage where Colonel Henderson would speak. Richard had cut his hair shorter and trimmed his beard. He looked healthier, more alive somehow. How's it going, Richard? DeAndre asked as he approached. Richard looked up and smiled. It was still strange to see that smile, so different from the sneer he'd worn the first night they met. Good, man. Really good. Just got word yesterday that I start my new job on Monday. The construction company? Yeah, Richard said, pride evident in his voice. Foreman position. Colonel Henderson put in a good word for me with the owner, but I still had to interview and prove myself. They said they were impressed with how I handled it. That's because you're getting your life back together, DeAndre said, clapping him on the shoulder. You earned that job. Richard's expression grew more serious. I couldn't have done it without this program, without you giving me a chance when you had every right to never speak to me again. We all need second chances, DeAndre said. I needed one once too. Now I'm just paying it forward. The two men had developed an unlikely friendship over the past 3 months. After that first meeting, Richard had shown up to every single session. He'd gone through the difficult work of unpacking his trauma, facing his anger, and learning healthier ways to cope. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and hard days, but he'd kept coming back. More surprisingly, Richard had brought the other bikers with him. All 5 of them had become regular members of the program. Rodney was now 2 months sober and volunteering at a youth center. The guy with the shaved head, whose name was Tommy, had reconciled with his ex-wife and was seeing his kids again. The other 2 were making progress too, taking it one day at a time. Betty rang a bell behind the bar, signaling that the meeting was about to start. Everyone found their seats and the room quieted down. Colonel Henderson made his way to the small stage, moving a bit slower than he used to, but still carrying that same commanding presence. Good evening, everyone, the colonel said, his voice filling the room easily. I see some familiar faces and some new ones. For those who are here for the first time, welcome. You've taken the hardest step just by walking through that door. He paused, looking around the room with genuine affection. 3 months ago, something happened in this very bar. Something that could have ended in violence and hatred. Instead, it became a turning point, Not just for the people involved, but for this entire program. The colonel gestured to Richard and DeAndre. Richard, DeAndre, would you both come up here, please? They exchanged glances and made their way to the stage. DeAndre had no idea what the colonel was planning, but he trusted the old man completely. Tell everyone what happened that night, Colonel Henderson said to Richard. Don't leave anything out. Richard took a deep breath. Speaking in front of crowds still made him nervous, but he'd been working on it in therapy. 3 months ago, I was at my lowest point. I was angry, drunk, and looking for someone to blame for everything wrong in my life. When DeAndre walked into this bar that night, I saw him as a target, because of the color of his skin, because he wore a uniform that reminded me of everything I'd lost, because it was easier to hate him than to face what was really wrong with me. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. I threatened him, said horrible things, tried to start a fight with a man who'd done nothing to me except exist. I was surrounded by people who encouraged my worst instincts instead of helping me be better. And I would have hurt him if the colonel and his unit hadn't shown up. Several people in the crowd nodded. They understood that darkness, that place where pain turns into rage and rage looks for an outlet. But instead of pressing charges, instead of walking away and never thinking about me again, DeAndre did something I'll never understand. Richard continued. He offered to help me. He sat at a table with me and shared his own struggles. He made me see that we weren't that different, and he gave me a chance to become better than I was. Richard turned to face DeAndre directly. You saved my life that night. Not with your fists or your military training, but with your compassion. You're a better man than I'll ever be, but you make me want to try to be better every day. The room was silent except for a few sniffles. Even some of the toughest-looking vets were wiping their eyes. DeAndre stepped forward, his own throat tight with emotion. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got help when I needed it and decided to pass that help along. Richard's the one doing the hard work. He's the one showing up, facing his demons and choosing to change. That takes more courage than anything I did in combat. Colonel Henderson put a hand on each of their shoulders. This is what this program is about. It's about veterans helping veterans. It's about breaking the cycles of anger and pain that trap us. It's about choosing to be better than our worst moments. He addressed the crowd again. Over the past 3 months, I've watched Richard and his friends transform. I've watched them go from men consumed by bitterness to men who volunteer to help others. Richard now mentors new members who struggle with anger issues. Rodney leads our addiction support group. Tommy helps veterans navigate custody battles and family reconciliation. They've become leaders in this community. Betty stood up from where she'd been sitting at the bar, and they've made this place better too. The Rusty Nail used to be just a bar. Now it's a sanctuary, a place where veterans know they can come and be understood, where they can find help instead of enabling. My brother and I couldn't be prouder of what this has become. She looked at Richard with tears in her eyes. I forgive you, Richard, for scaring me that night, for threatening my job, for everything. And I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Richard nodded, unable to speak through his emotion. The colonel cleared his throat. We have some people here tonight who want to share their stories. But first, I want to announce something special. The mayor has approved funding to expand our program. We'll be able to help twice as many veterans, offer more services, and open a second location across town. The room erupted in applause. This was huge. So many veterans needed help and couldn't get it because resources were stretched thin. This expansion would change lives. We couldn't have gotten this funding without proof that our program works, the colonel continued. And that proof came from the story of what happened here 3 months ago. The video that was recorded that night, the one showing the confrontation and the reconciliation, went viral online. Millions of people watched it. They saw what's possible when we choose compassion over conflict, when we offer second chances instead of condemnation. DeAndre hadn't known about the video going viral. He'd avoided looking at it after that night, not wanting to relive the experience. But now he understood why strangers had been recognizing him around town, why he'd gotten so many friend requests on social media. That video started a national conversation, the colonel said, about how we treat veterans, about racism and redemption, about what real strength looks like. News outlets covered it, politicians referenced it, and most importantly, it inspired other communities to start similar programs. We've gotten calls from 20 different states asking how to replicate what we're doing here. Richard stepped forward again. I never thought the worst night of my life would become something positive. But if our story can help other people find their way back, then maybe all that pain had a purpose. The meeting continued with testimonials from other veterans. A woman who'd been homeless for 2 years talked about how the program helped her find housing and employment. A young vet with severe PTSD shared how group therapy had given him tools to manage his symptoms. An older Vietnam vet spoke about finally processing trauma he'd carried for 50 years. When the formal meeting ended, people broke into smaller groups. DeAndre found himself surrounded by new members wanting to hear his perspective, wanting to know how he'd found the strength to forgive. He shared honestly about his own struggles and recovery, emphasizing that he was still a work in progress. Richard approached with 2 bottles of water from the bar. They'd both stopped drinking alcohol at these meetings, wanting to stay clear-headed and set a good example. "Thanks for everything, man," Richard said, handing DeAndre a water. "I mean it. Thank you for seeing past what I was that night and seeing what I could become." "We all have the capacity for good and bad," DeAndre said. "The choice of which one to nurture is up to us. You chose good. That's all that matters now." They stood together, watching the room full of veterans supporting each other, healing together, becoming better versions of themselves. In the corner, Rodney was helping a new member fill out VA paperwork. Tommy was exchanging phone numbers with someone struggling with addiction, offering to be an accountability partner. The colonel was counseling a young vet who looked like he was on the edge of giving up. This was what service looked like after the uniform came off. This was how warriors became healers. This was proof that people could change, that hate could transform into love, that the worst moments could become catalysts for the best outcomes. Betty started serving food, plates of sandwiches and snacks for everyone. It had become tradition to share a meal after the meetings, to break bread together and reinforce the bonds of community. As DeAndre bit into a sandwich and listened to the conversations flowing around him, he thought about that night 3 months ago. He'd walked into this bar just wanting a drink and some peace. Instead, he'd found his purpose. He discovered that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with patience, compassion, and the courage to see humanity in people who've forgotten their own. The Rusty Nail had become a place of transformation, and the story of what happened there would continue to ripple outward, changing lives and proving that redemption is always possible for those willing to reach for it.